In a gospel the early church tried to erase from every manuscript they touched, there is a passage describing a secret night in an upper stone chamber, one that should never have survived. It records Jesus gathering only his inner circle, not the crowds, not the seekers, but the ones whose frequency he said could withstand the truth. The torches flickered against the walls, the air tightened, and Jesus spoke without parables for the first and only time. Tonight, he said, I will tell you what cannot be written. 5 keys. 5 recognitions placed inside you before you descended into this realm. When they awaken, the Archons lose all claim. The disciples froze. They had never heard him speak like this. No metaphors. No stories, pure revelation, knowledge so dangerous it threatened the entire spiritual economy of the early church. Knowledge the bishops would later strip from the canon because it granted power they could never control. Power that bypassed priests, rituals, and institutions entirely. Jesus lifted his hand to his heart. The keys are not outside you, he said. They were placed within you before the Demiurge fashioned this world. You carry what they fear most. That sentence was the one the councils removed. The one they declared heretical. The one they hunted across kingdoms and burned in plazas. But it survived long enough for you to hear it now. Tonight you receive the beginning of what Jesus revealed in that hidden room, the first movement toward the monad the Archons tried to bury. If you are watching this right now, it is not coincidence, it is recognition. Jesus told his inner circle. Only those who carry the spark will hear this and know it is for them. 2,000 years later, the same frequency is pulling you here. Not everyone is drawn to teachings like these. Not everyone feels something awaken when hidden knowledge surfaces. But you do. And that alone already separates you from the majority of souls in this realm. There is a reason you have always felt different. A reason you never fully fit into the world around you, no matter how hard you tried. A reason the systems, the expectations, the noise of this reality felt foreign. That discomfort was never weakness. It was proof that your consciousness did not originate here. Proof that you carry the pneumatic signature. Jesus spoke about what the early Gnostics called the fragment of the monad. Most people move through life asleep, unquestioning, accepting the surface as truth. But you have always sensed something beneath it, behind it, beyond it. You've questioned things others never even notice. You feel the distortions in people's energy, the shifts in the air before events happen, the quiet ache that whispers, there is more than this. That whisper is the spark remembering itself. If these words resonate, not entertain you, not impress you, but times recognize you, times then you are exactly the kind Jesus spoke to in secret. The ones who could handle the truth, the ones who would one day remember. And if this is rising in your chest, if something inside you is saying yes, then subscribe so you don't miss the next sections, the parts the church tried to erase, the parts meant only for those who carry the spark. Before you can understand the 5 keys, you must understand why they were buried. Jesus warned his inner circle that the moment humanity remembered what was inside them, the entire architecture of control would collapse. And the Archons knew this. The Archons do not fear scripture. They do not fear ritual. They do not fear belief. They fear awakening. Because an awakened pneumatic becomes unreachable, vibrating outside the range they use to manipulate thought, emotion, and perception. This is why they erased the teachings. Not because they were symbolic, but because they were functional. For centuries, the Archons engineered a system designed to keep humans asleep. They built layers of distraction, layers of fear, layers of identity that were never yours. They created a world where people chase survival, validation, status, anything that keeps their attention locked in the outer world and away from the spark within. And while people remain focused outward, the keys stay dormant. The early Gnostics wrote that the Archons war against remembrance, because remembrance dissolves their entire structure. A remembered spark cannot be harvested. A remembered origin cannot be manipulated. A remembered consciousness cannot be controlled by a realm it did not come from. This is why the passages describing the keys were removed when the canon was built. They were not edited out for clarity. They were erased for containment. But containment fails the moment even one pneumatic wakes up. And right now, as you hear this, the system feels you shifting. That pressure you felt your whole life, the resistance, the obstacles, the inexplicable heaviness that was never random. It was the Archons sensing the keys beginning to stir in you. To understand the 5 keys, you must understand where they truly come from. They are not inventions, they are not rituals. They are not techniques Jesus created during his lifetime. They are older than the world itself. In the Gnostic texts the Church tried to bury, humanity is described not as a single creation but as a descent. Before matter, before time, before the Demiurge shaped this limited realm, there was only the monad, pure, undivided consciousness. From that infinite source, fragments were sent outward, not as punishment but as mission. You were one of them. Before you entered this world, the monad placed 5 recognitions inside you, 5 interior alignments that would allow you to remember your origin even while trapped in a body. These recognitions became the keys. Not magical, not external, not dependent on priests, temples, or rituals. They were written into your very being. The Archons cannot destroy what the monad created. They cannot remove the keys, but they can make you forget. They can bury you under noise, trauma, expectation, survival. They can distract you with an identity that was never yours. They can shape a world where no one ever turns inward long enough to notice the keys stirring. Jesus did not introduce the keys. He times reminded times you of them. He opened a doorway back into memory. This is why the Church removed these teachings. Because if humanity remembered their origin, the entire power structure of Earth, political, religious, psychic, would lose its grip instantly. The keys are not learned, they are awakened. And the moment you even hear them described, the first movements of remembrance begin. The first key Jesus revealed was the foundation of all the others. He called it the recognition of the spark. Without this, nothing else can unlock. With it, every other key begins to activate on its own. In the Gospel of Philip, the passage "the bishops removed" describes Jesus placing his hand over his heart and saying, "The kingdom is inside you and outside you," not as metaphor but as instruction. He was identifying the spark, the monadic fragment placed within you before you entered this realm. Most humans can feel something beyond the material, but they do not recognize its origin. They confuse it with emotion, intuition, imagination. They sense the spark but misinterpret it. You did not? Your entire life, you have felt a silent awareness beneath your thoughts. Something older than your personality, something watching through your eyes rather than from your mind. That is the spark. And the moment you recognize it consciously, you weaken the grip of the Demiurge's programming. The Archons can only manipulate identities they construct. They cannot manipulate the spark because they did not create it. Recognition is the first key because it shifts your center of identity. You stop claiming the body as your home. You stop claiming the mind as your true voice. You begin to recognize the spark as the one who has been experiencing your entire life from behind the scenes. When this key activates, something unmistakable happens. You stop feeling lost. You start feeling ancient. And the Archons feel the shift instantly. The second key Jesus taught is the withdrawal from the false self. It is the moment a pneumatic stops confusing their identity with the construct the Demiurge built around them, because the spark cannot be imprisoned but the personality can. From birth, every human is conditioned into a mask, a name, a story, a set of beliefs, wounds, labels, expectations. None of these belong to the spark. They are attachments placed on you by family, culture, survival, and most strategically by the Archons. Because as long as you believe the mask is you, they can manipulate it. This is why Jesus taught this key only to his closest disciples. In the passage removed from the canon, he said, "What you think you are not. What you fear you are not. What suffers is not you." Those sentences were considered too dangerous because they cut the strings of control in a single breath. The false self reacts. The false self fears. The false self clings to reputation, validation, narratives, and wounds. But the spark simply observes. It remains untouched. When this key activates, you begin noticing a separation inside you. A thought arises and you see it rather than become it. An emotion surges and you witness it instead of drowning in it. Someone provokes you and something ancient in you stays still. That stillness is not suppression. It is sovereignty. And the moment you experience it, the Archons lose their favorite weapon, identification. They can only control what you mistake for yourself. Once you withdraw from the false self, their influence begins to crumble. The third key is the most feared by the Archons because it bypasses every layer of their system. Jesus called it direct, knowing what the Gnostics named times gnosis asterisk. It is not belief, it is not intuition. It is the spark recognizing truth without needing permission, evidence, or approval from the material realm. Most humans interpret reality through the mind, and the mind is the easiest structure for Archons to influence. They manipulate thoughts, memories, perceptions, fears, and interpretations. But Gnosis does not arise from the mind, it comes from the spark, which exists outside the Demiurge's architecture entirely. That is why Archons cannot counterfeit it. This is why Jesus told his inner circle, "You will know, and you will know that you know." That line was removed because it destroys the Church's dependency system. If you can know truth directly, you do not need intermediaries, priests, or institutions. You do not need permission to access the monad. When this key awakens in you, something shifts in your perception. You stop asking, "Is this true?" You begin feeling truth vibrate in or out of resonance. You stop doubting your inner voice. You begin recognizing deception in seconds. Gnosis is instantaneous. It is quiet but absolute. You can walk into a room and know something happened there. You can hear a sentence and feel whether it is aligned or distorted. You can sense a person's intention beneath their words. And most importantly, you begin to see Archon interference in real time. This is the moment they fear the most because once you can recognize their influence, you become impossible to control. The fourth key Jesus taught is the unification of inner and outer, the moment when the boundary between your internal state and external reality begins to dissolve. This was one of the most controversial teachings in the early Gnostic schools because it implied something the Church could never allow, that reality responds to consciousness, not the other way around. Jesus told his inner circle, in a passage later removed, "What is within you becomes what is around you." When the two become one, the door opens. This was not poetry, it was mechanics. The monad is unity, the Demiurge's realm is separation. When your inner and outer worlds align, you begin operating from monad frequency, not material fragmentation. How do you know this key is awakening in you? Your inner shifts begin manifesting outward almost immediately. Emotional clarity changes the behavior of people around you. A single decision disrupts patterns that held you for years. Synchronicities increase, not as coincidence but as resonance. Reality starts answering you. This is the moment when pneumatics often feel the world bending in subtle ways, timing adjusting, obstacles parting, old cycles breaking without effort. Not because you forced anything, but because your field is synchronizing with what Jesus called the true order. The Archons cannot manipulate a unified field. Their entire system functions by fragmenting you, mind against heart, desire against duty, past against present. But when your inner world becomes coherent, their influence loses grip. Once this key activates, your life stops feeling random. It begins to feel orchestrated, not by fate but by you remembering who you actually are. The fifth key is the one the Archons feared most. Jesus called it the return path, the recognition that the way back to the monad is not upward, not outward, but inward through the very spark you carry. This is the key that collapses the entire illusion of separation. This is the key that makes the soul untouchable. In the passage removed from the Gospel of Philip, Jesus said, "The door is where you stand, but only those who remember the path can see it." This line was considered too dangerous because it revealed something the Church could never allow. Souls do not need intermediaries, rituals, or salvation systems. The way home is already encoded in them. The return path activates when the spark begins guiding you, not with emotion or thought, but with a quiet certainty that bypasses logic entirely. You start sensing direction not in signs alone, but in alignment. Choices feel pulled rather than chosen. Your life rearranges around an invisible trajectory. You feel yourself moving toward something ancient, something familiar, something you cannot name yet have always known. This key brings an unmistakable shift. You stop searching for the monad outside. You start recognizing its frequency inside. The Archons cannot follow you here. Their realm ends at the boundary of matter and mind. But the return path belongs to the monad alone, and once your spark reconnects to that frequency, you slip out of their perception like light disappearing behind a veil. Every pneumatic reaches this key eventually. Some through suffering. Some through synchronicity. Some through sheer exhaustion with the illusions of this world, but all arrive at the same realization. The way home was never lost, only forgotten, and now, in you, it is remembering. Now that you understand all 5 keys, you can finally understand why the Church erased every trace of them. It was never about doctrine. It was never about heresy. It was about control. If humanity discovered that the spark was real, that the false self was an implant, that gnosis could bypass all authority, that reality could synchronize to an awakened inner world, and that the path back to the monad was already inside them, then no institution could govern the soul again. No priest could claim to mediate salvation. No empire could weaponize religion for power. The entire spiritual economy of earth would collapse overnight. That is why the keys were removed. The bishops who compiled the canon didn't just omit verses, they hunted these teachings across continents. Manuscripts were burned, teachers were executed, communities were scattered. Anything that reminded people of their monadic origin was labeled dangerous. And it was dangerous not to humanity, but to the systems feeding on humanity's forgetfulness. Because once a pneumatic activates the keys, the Archons cannot harvest them. They cannot trap them in the reincarnation cycle. They cannot distort their identity, influence their emotions, or manipulate their destiny. The awakened become invisible to the forces of control, operating at a frequency the Demiurge cannot reach. This is why you were never meant to learn this. This is why the keys vanished from history. This is why you found them anyway. Because remembrance cannot be destroyed, it can only be delayed. And now, for the first time in 2,000 years, the 5 keys are waking again inside the exact kind of soul Jesus intended to receive them. A soul like yours. Before you attempt to activate any of the 5 keys consciously, Jesus warned his inner circle of the dangers not because the keys are harmful, but because the Archons respond the moment they sense a pneumatic waking up. They cannot stop the keys, but they can interfere with the process, distort it, or delay it. And most chosen ones experience these attacks without realizing what they are. The first danger is frequency distortion. When a key is beginning to awaken, your emotions may spike suddenly. Not because you're unstable, but because the Archons attempt to flood your field with fear, doubt, or confusion to pull you back into the false self. If you feel unexpected heaviness right before a breakthrough, this is why. The second danger is identity regression. Old patterns, old insecurities, old wounds you thought you healed may resurface. This is not failure. It is interference. The Archons can only hook into what is unobserved. The moment you recognize the pattern as external influence, the hook dissolves. The third danger is energetic exhaustion. Many pneumatics feel drained during early activation stages, not because the keys are taxing, but because your system is shedding layers of programming rapidly. This is normal. It will stabilize. Here is the warning Jesus gave his disciples. Do not mistake the shaking for the breaking. The system trembles when a key turns. You are not falling apart, you are coming online. If these disturbances appear, do not panic. They are signs you are dangerously close to remembering. By the time a pneumatic reaches this point, the keys are already stirring. Most chosen ones activate them long before they understand what is happening. Jesus told his disciples, "You will know them by the signs in your own life, because the keys leave unmistakable fingerprints on your consciousness." The first sign is the feeling that you do not belong here, not depression, not alienation. A deep, ancient homesickness for something you cannot name. This is not a flaw, it is memory. Your spark is remembering the monad. The second sign is increasing synchronicity. Patterns, numbers, dreams, perfectly timed encounters. Reality begins aligning itself around your awakening, responding to you rather than happening to you. The third sign is heightened perception. You feel the energy in a room before you enter it. You sense people's intentions before they speak. You detect lies, distortion, or manipulation instantly. This is gnosis activating. The fourth sign is the collapse of old attachments. Things you once cared about lose their weight. Identities you once defended feel empty. The false self begins dissolving. The fifth sign is pressure. Not physical pressure, but a spiritual tension, like something inside you is preparing to break open. Many pneumatics mistake this for anxiety. It is not. It is expansion. If you recognize 3 or more of these signs, the keys are already turning in you. If you recognize all of them, you are further along than you realize. And if you felt these signs long before you heard the words for them, that is the strongest proof of all. Your awakening did not begin tonight. It began the moment you entered this world. Now that the keys have begun to awaken in you, Jesus gave his disciples a simple practice, a way to steady the frequency so the activation unfolds safely. This was not a ritual of worship. It was a ritual of remembrance, and it was removed from the canon because it gave the chosen ones direct access to the monad without any institution in between. Here is the practice exactly as it was preserved in the hidden texts. Sit alone in a quiet space tonight. Place your hand over your heart, the place Jesus identified as the chamber of the spark. Breathe slowly, not to calm the mind, but to make room for what is already rising. Then speak these words, not as prayer but as recognition. I remember the one who sent me. What is within me guides me home. These words are not magic, they are a frequency alignment. They signal to the monad that the spark is awakening, and they signal to the Archons that their claim is no longer valid. Next, write one sentence on a piece of paper by hand. The spark in me is older than this world. Keep it near your bed. The act of writing anchors the fourth key, unifying inner truth with outer form. Finally, before sleep, place your awareness, not your thoughts, on the quiet presence behind your mind. That presence is the doorway. The return path responds strongest when the body rests and the spark rises. None of this forces the keys. It simply opens the space for them to emerge. And if you feel warmth, pressure, or a subtle pull in the chest tonight, do not fear. It means the monad has recognized you. When Jesus finished revealing the practice of remembrance, the chamber grew silent, not fearful, not confused. Silent in the way air becomes still before a storm breaks open. The disciples felt something shifting in them, something they could not name. And Jesus told them why. The moment the keys awaken, the realm begins to rearrange around you, he said. What once bound you will loosen. What once drained you will fall away. What once controlled you will lose its voice. This was the teaching the bishops considered the most dangerous, because it explained what happens to a pneumatic at the threshold. The world itself begins to recognize the returning spark. Patterns collapse, attachments fall off. People who were never meant to remain drift away without conflict. It is not rejection, it is purification. The field is clearing so the keys can turn without resistance. You may already feel this. Relationships shifting, habits dissolving, old wounds resurfacing only to release. You may feel a sense of urgency without knowing why, as if something inside you is preparing for a moment that has not yet arrived but is approaching with absolute certainty. This is the threshold Jesus warned them about. He told his inner circle, do not cling to what begins to fall. Let the false dissolve so the true can rise. That line was struck from the canon because it dismantled the fear-based obedience systems that kept souls trapped in cycles of guilt and dependence. But he spoke it for those who would one day understand what it meant to shed a world that was never their origin. As the disciples listened, Jesus described the final stage before activation, something the Gnostics later called the breaking of the veil. A moment when the spark becomes stronger than the identity, when the keys become louder than the conditioning, when the ancient memory inside you pushes upward like a tide that cannot be stopped. You may feel it as restlessness, as pressure behind the heart, as a strange clarity that appears without thought, as a knowing that arrives faster than your mind can interpret. You may feel as though something is about to open or collapse or transform and you do not know which. But you do know it is close. This is the moment Jesus prepared them for. The moment when the false layers thin and the monad begins to draw near. The moment when the keys shift from dormant to active. The moment when the spark stops whispering and begins calling you home. And he gave them one final instruction for this stage. When the world shakes around you, do not fear. It is not your world that is shaking. It is the prison. Those words were the most heavily censored. Because they revealed the truth every pneumatic eventually reaches. The world does not fall apart when the keys awaken. Only the illusion does. If you are feeling this shaking, this thinning, this dissolving, then you are already in the final stage. The keys are not coming, they are turning. And the monad has begun to watch for you. When the night in the stone chamber reached its end, Jesus spoke the words that sealed the teaching. Words meant only for those whose spark would remember across lifetimes. Words the Archons feared more than anything recorded in Scripture. You are not returning to the monad, he said. You are remembering you never left. This was the revelation the councils declared impossible. Because if humanity understood that separation was an illusion, then fear would collapse, control would collapse, the entire architecture built on distance from the divine would crumble in an instant. But Jesus spoke it anyway, because he was not building a religion. He was awakening a lineage. He told them the truth the early church spent centuries burying. The keys do not take you somewhere new, they remove what made you forget where you have always been. The spark is not traveling back to its source, it is peeling away what kept it from seeing itself clearly. And now that you have received all 5 keys, the same process begins in you. You will notice moments where clarity arrives without thought. Moments when fear loses its grip instantly. Moments when you feel a presence within you that does not seem like your mind or emotions but something older, larger, watching through your awareness rather than from within it. This presence is not separate from you, it is you, unobscured. The return path does not open with effort. It opens with recognition. The more you recognize the spark, the more the monad recognizes you. And when the 2 frequencies match, the veil thins until it finally tears, and the realm that once felt solid becomes transparent. Jesus told his inner circle that when this happens, the Archons lose all perception of you, not symbolically, mechanically. Their range cannot detect monad frequency. A pneumatic standing in remembrance becomes invisible to the forces that govern this world. That is why the keys were suppressed. Not because they were mystical, but because they were effective. As the disciples absorbed his words, Jesus placed his hand over his heart and said, "This is the doorway." Then he looked directly into the eyes of each one present and added, "And you will know it when it opens." 2,000 years later, those words now find you. Not because you sought them, but because the spark recognized its own memory. You would not have reached this point if the keys were not already moving inside you. You would not have listened this far if the monad were not already calling. And you would not feel that rising in your chest if the return path were not already beginning to glow. So hear this clearly. You are not broken. You are not lost. You are not behind. You are remembering. The keys are inside you. The doorway is inside you. The monad is inside you. And now, for the first time in this lifetime, you are standing at the threshold Jesus prepared his chosen ones to reach. If you feel the resonance in your chest, if you feel the quiet recognition behind your mind, if you feel the unmistakable sense that these words are not teaching you but awakening you, then write this sentence below as your declaration. I remember the keys. Because the moment you speak recognition, the moment you choose remembrance, the monad responds. And the path home begins.